Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm joined by a regular visitor now in the podcast, which I'm so excited about. His name is Ryan. He's already done a couple of podcasts. He's a former Unfaithful. We have protected his identity because he does work in the public eye, and he's married to a rock star that one day may actually come into the podcast, but until then, we're keeping their identities safe and private. So, Ryan, I had this client the other day say to me, dude, when is Ryan coming back? I love that guy. So you're racking up fans in the hundreds.
Well, I'm certainly happy to be here. It's a pleasure to be here with you and your audience, and thanks for the opportunity to chat again today.
I think the audience really loves to have actual survivors of infidelity. And as we talk about every time you come in, there's thousands upon thousands of people out there leading the charge to say, once a cheater, always a cheater. You'll never heal. You can't save your marriage. There's no hope. And then there's people like you and your wife who are living testimonies that it is possible to heal. And there's so many more like you, but not all of them can come into a podcast, protect their identity, and share your story. So I know we're all incredibly grateful for you doing this. So today we're going to talk about something that's really sticky from the perspective that this, in many ways, will help betrayed understand what goes on in the mind of an unfaithful as they are kind of before the affair and then as they kind of actually engage in the affair or multiple affairs. For the unfaithful, this might be helpful to listen to someone who's very well spoken, who has their thoughts in order about what it was like for them. But as we launch out, what was going on in your mind as you stepped into infidelity? You didn't fall in it, right? We're not making excuses. You had the affair. You made the choice, as did I. What was going on internally before you actually finally really made the choice to have an affair?
So, a great starting point. I think fundamentally, first, I'd like to begin by saying my decisions were my decisions. As you said, I am 100% accountable for those. And everything I did had absolutely nothing to do with my spouse. Was our marriage perfect? No. Was my spouse perfect? No. But she was pretty damn great. So, all of the things I did, all the trouble I got myself into, all the chaos that I brought into our lives, our marriage, our kids, our friends, that was all on me. And so if I think about where my mind was, I like to put it into literally two categories. And the first category I'm going to use is my bucket. Sometimes therapists will talk about, your bucket. And your bucket is filled with like all the things that are good, all the things that are meaningful to you, the things that you kind of like rely on. And if your bucket gets drained in certain areas, like connection or applause, that kind of thing, as weird as that one may sound, you go out kind of searching how to fill that bucket back up. And I had kind of, so let's just talk about that. And the second piece is really about ego, because for me, having an affair was the ultimate ego move. It was completely rooted in self-centeredness. So let's go back to the first one, that bucket, right? Like I had grown up in this environment where I had done a bunch of good things. I'd always been, the favored son. I had earned this commission in the Marine Corps, which had pride and prestige and honor. And over a couple of years, I kind of found that I didn't have that anymore because I had gone into sales outside of the military. And so when I talk about the bucket, I was really seeking out people who would help fill that missing thing in my life. That idea of being respected and honored or applauded or respected. So I really went out looking to try to fill that bucket. And then the second one, I'll be a bit shorter, is my last two affairs were multi-year affairs. And again, this was at a time where things were fantastic between my wife and I, physically, emotionally, financially. I had kind of climbed the ladder in this company I was with, and I had enjoyed some promotions and a bunch of praise. And boy, I got to tell you, my head swelled like a Goodyear blimp. I became an applause addict. And again, I was really looking for people to fill that need that I had, just to be like somebody who was respected and honored and kind of put up on this pedestal. So for me, it came down to filling that bucket with a huge mix of ego. So that's kind of how I'd answer that one.
It's interesting, though. You talked about the marriage was fine. It was great. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't like it was troubling. It wasn't like it was on the rocks. I've heard a number of betrayed spouses who have said early on in recovery, well, obviously something was wrong with me because he felt the need to go outside the marriage. So, for the betrayeds that are sitting here, maybe still thinking that, you just said that was not the case, right?
100%. What I did, back to what I said, had nothing to do with her. For those who dig into it and who are really willing to do the work and learn a little bit, you'll find that it's not necessarily what's happening with the other person. It's really about what's happening with the person who goes and acts out. Again, was my wife perfect? No, nobody is. That's impossible, right? Was the marriage perfect? No. But what's just so sad is when I look back at these last two, our marriage was pretty darn good. And when the first of the long-term affairs happened, it was actually pretty great. And so I can imagine these years later thinking about where my wife's head, this is more than a decade later, just going, what in the world, possessed you to do this when every aspect, just about every aspect of our marriage was on, 5 out of 5. And it just, I looking back again, nothing to do with her, 100% to do with me, ego and trying to fill that bucket.
So, when you think about the quality of your mental health at the time, when you think about, man, ego, just wanting a sense of adrenaline, dopamine, wanting to feel wanted. I mean, talk about your mental health at the time. What was going on inside of you that you remember feeling before and leading up to the affairs?
So when I think about mental health and kind of where my head was back then, again, let's context it in terms of the two affairs. So if we go back to the first one, which is well over a decade ago, lasted about 2 years. Ego was a huge part of what was happening for me. Again, I had my career was kind of up and on the rise, and I had a big team, and I was leading folks, and I was just an applause junkie. But when I reflect on that, I think about some key factors or ingredients that contributed to me going down this road. And again, this is from a mental point of view. I mean, the first was, integrity was something I really didn't value on a personal or even commitment front. I was wrapped up in lying because I was good at it. It was second nature, and fidelity. My dad had had an affair and I didn't really see a ton of consequences. Secondly, I was in the middle of a work culture where drinking and expense reports and hotels and late night travel, that was just part of what we did. But I think the biggest piece from a mental health piece of the equation, if I tie it back to that, was really entitlement. I mean, I thought, boy, I worked really hard to get to where I'm at. I make all the money. And this was the story that I was telling myself was rooted in the idea that, boy, I deserved all these good things, these fun things. So that's kind of, Tim, how I was thinking about the first one. If you'd like, I can jump into the second one and kind of talk a little bit about a change in my orientation.
Well, I think staying on the first one, you said it so well. You had this sense of entitlement. And oftentimes, there isn't a hatred for your spouse. There isn't, some type of deep-seated anger, bitterness, resentment, or retaliation behind an affair. Sometimes we make terrible choices. Sometimes we actually are unhealthy and we feel like we deserve extra attention or extra applause, right?
Spot on. I found myself in a situation where, while I always respected the work that was being done by my wife at home with our kids and raising them, I think that I had this attitude in my head like what I was doing was more important. What I was
Mm.
doing had more stress. I was coming home, and yes, I mean, she's incredible across all the dimensions of everything you would want for somebody who's managing everything on the home front. Like, I'm serious when I say 10 out of 10. But there was something in that back of my head that just said, I'm out here grinding. I'm on planes. I'm, doing the commute. I'm going to have this little thing that's for me on the side. Nobody's going to get hurt. I can kind of talk my way out of it. It's just me. It's just fun. She'll never find out because I'm too smart to let that happen. These are the stupid things you tell yourself. So again, she was the complete victim in this one, despite doing so many things right on the marriage front. And I just was too stupid to see it.
Well, you did what a lot of us do, which is we self-deceive. We basically say, right, I'm working hard, I deserve this. And then we have this entitlement that we love to utilize, which says it's not that big of a deal. So having it be modeled for you by your dad, and then seeing a very normalized culture of it, and then feeling like, well, look at how hard I'm working. So the level of self-deception and the justification, right? It was the same way in many ways with me. So now let's talk about the second affair.
So the second affair actually came pretty quickly after the first long-term affair. We had gotten some help, as some of your listeners from the previous one might remember. We'd gotten some help. I had certainly held back a lot of the details, thinking that I was protecting her. What a crock of garbage that was. I was just protecting myself. As we got into the second affair, like I was really in a different kind of headspace just for some factors, right? So, the quick story goes something like this, right? At that point, my career kind of stalled. All that initial energy around promotions and team and growth and all these things, that had really started to taper off. And what I found was that I didn't have the coping skills, and my ego was in this huge crisis mode. Like I didn't know how to handle this slowdown. I really started to look for something to make my time at the office, where I spent a bunch of time, better. I mean, I was even blaming people. I was blaming my boss or the organization, right? Like I'm still Mr. Valuable. I was effectively the president of my own fan club. I think deep down in my core, I was frustrated and I was really angry that I was no longer looked at like this guy who's just on the up and up, like this, firework getting ready to go off. So I got lost, if you think about it, in that thing that we often call like a status maze, right? I remained somebody who continue to crave that attention, that applause, and that adoration. So after, or rather as a result, I kind of began to wallow in that self-pity, woe is me attitude. And worse, making it totally worse, is the fact that I wasn't really willing to work harder or even pivot in a direction that would actually fix it. So what did I do? I kind of settled into like cruise control, mediocre. I figured I could just glide and find something that would make all of that worthwhile on a day-to-day basis. So again, this comes back to filling up that bucket. So it was about attention and admiration and excitement. Why not, right? Because I deserve something good. I was still bringing in the money. And sadly, just I'll finish it off by saying it just came down to the idea that I felt entitled. This was just for me. I was working hard. All the success rested on us. So I took the easy way out. And rather than working on me, rather than having the moral courage, of which I had none, to bring it out in the open, tell somebody, tell a therapist, God forbid, tell my wife and fall down and just say, hey, I want to fix this. I want to get better. I had none of that courage. And so I brought destruction into our marriage. And that's a rough thing to look back on.
What's interesting is you told me a story. I'd like you to retell it, but you went through this exercise of trying to really write out, you called it a dissertation as to why you did what you did. And it was very lengthy, and your wife had a response to it that totally took you off guard. So, talk a little bit about that.
You talk about trying to do the hard work and just completely failing. And I wish I had a way to make this kind of funny and maybe if there's humor in anything. So, one of the things that you helped me understand early into what I call my honest recovery, along with a therapist or two, was the importance of getting to the why, the importance of you as an unfaithful, peeling back the onion, looking at all the dimensions, childhood, all that kind of stuff, right? How you got to where you got, right? So to your point, my wife supported me. Gosh, it took 5, 6 months, hundreds of dollars with therapists, bunch of time with you. It was all constructive. And in the end, I think I had like a 6 or 7 page single space kind of dissertation on my why. And I used a bunch of different materials, like a Fair Recovery's Moral Justification series and Leaning on You. And at the end, I had this great document. So with great excitement and a definite amount of anxiousness, I sat down with her and I read it to her, and she listened to the whole thing. And when I was done, she kind of looked and she said, thank you, because she understood how important it was that I understood. And I was like, well, what'd you think? And what I remember her saying was something to the effect of, you kind of failed. Like, you didn't answer the question. And after talking with her and processing some things with her, what I realized was that, yes, the assignment was to explore the why. That's very important, and it changes over time. But the thing that she really wanted me to get to was not why did you do this, but rather how could you do this? And that's where I failed completely. And that was kind of a punch to the gut after a work product that took so long. So that kind of brings us here to what we're talking about today. Again, that what's going on inside the mind of the unfaithful isn't always what you think. And it's 99% of the time it's wrapped around, what's going on inside the unfaithful.
So she has this moment. She says, hey, great job, big fat fail. And you are faced with, man, okay, now I got to retrace my steps and come to a better point of the audacity within me. Now, contrast the Ryan before the affair, the entitlement, and then Ryan has just worked his butt off and written this long document. And she says, good try. How do you feel at that moment? Was your pride wounded? Were you still kind of feeling angry, defensive, or was that a good, swift kick in the butt that you needed to go deeper?
It wasn't the come to Jesus moment, but it was definitely like a moment of reflection where I was hearing her clear. Now, there was some defensiveness, like, hey, wait a minute. I'm telling you, how could you is rooted in all of these things. But again, it was like an arrow shooting it at the round circle. And that arrow just, I thought, hit right in the middle, way over the top. So if I compare and contrast the two versions of me, the older version of me would have been angry and frustrated. And don't get me wrong, I probably had a fair amount of that in me. This person who had spent all this time reflecting on the why, only to come up really short, had started to develop some skills around coping, around understanding her point of view, about actively listening and listening with empathy. Because it kind of reminded me in hindsight of the old analogy of the teacher, right? Where you tend to get mad when your kids don't understand something you're teaching them. Well, if you're really thinking about it, is it their fault or is it your fault, right? You're trying to speak to the audience. So it kind of taught me, like, hey, sit up, switch places with her. I'm being figurative, and put yourself in her shoes and really think more deeply about the how could you piece, why that's so important to her, which, by the way, doesn't kind of negate why it's so important for an unfaithful to understand his or her why. But really, if we want to talk about empathy and putting yourselves in the other person's shoes, then we really needed to examine it from their point of view, which really is the how could you do this to me? How could you break my heart?
You make a phenomenal point. I was talking to a client the other day and he was really defensive and all of these different things. And I said, let me ask you something. Knowing everything that you've done, your multiple year affair, relapse upon relapse, would you trust you?
Yeah.
And he looked me dead in the eye and he was like, no, I wouldn't. And I said, so why are you demanding that your spouse trust you? Why are you demanding that? And it was a moment where I don't know that anybody had really had the audacity to kind of match his intensity and say, well, let me ask you something here. So, do you feel like, the other therapists that you worked with, I know them personally, they're phenomenal dudes. Do you feel like you had to have some moments where someone had to not get up in your face and have a powered confrontation, but more of a truth confrontation and say, hey, have you ever put yourself in your wife's shoes? Have you ever thought about what it's like to be married to Ryan right now?
On a number of occasions, I've heard you say somebody had to take me to the, therapeutic woodshed, right? And call a spade a spade. I can remember some honest conversations that you and I had. I can remember some very honest conversations, coaching conversations from therapists. But you're right. I mean, for those who are really committed to making a positive change and never being that person again, by the way, you weren't supposed to be this person to begin with, right? So, like, I'm constantly amazed when you'll hear folks or folks that I am either mentoring or have heard before, like, trust me, I'll never do this again. Well, kind of trusting you not to do it in the first place thing. So, yeah, it really does. For those who really want to make a change, like, I'm talking never be that person again, but understand the things of which you're capable. Sometimes it takes a little motivation to push yourself a little further into that empathy circle. But if you can really observe and try to live and breathe of what it must be like to be on the other side of you, to have your heart broken by somebody who you trusted literally with your life, that can go a long way to humbling you in a positive way. And it kind of creates that clean slate, that fresh foundation upon which you can build an honest recovery with. And you kind of need to get to that level where the slate and the foundation is clean. And therefore, the things that you put on top of that really are standing upon bedrock. And I know that's a big analogy, but that's kind of how I look at it.
No, I think it's very well said. Let me ask you something. We didn't talk about this off camera, but you being in the situation that you're in right now, your life is going very well. I know so much about your family. Things are just going smooth, not without difficulty, whether it be in, both of y'all's jobs and paying for all the things that you pay for with your kids, as do I with mine. But as you look at your life right now, the date of filming today is August 25th. As you look at your life, how do you think this overwhelming amount of trauma, the absolute just pain and grief and sorrow and having to confront yourself and your wife having to confront you and all of the things that you've been through. You've been able to save your marriage with your wife's help. Your little family is healthier than it's been in a long time. We both know that. How do you feel now towards other people who cheat, other situations, traumatic events that you see? How do you see yourself? How do you function in this world that we live in, having a past that you have? I've been asked this question tons of times. So I'm going to ask you, with a past like yours and enjoying restoration, I mean, how do you look at life? How do you look at your job? How do you look at your family? I mean, I know that so many other unfaithful who are not as far as you, and many betrayed, male and female, would be like, yes, how does he look at life in light of everything that he's been through?
Yeah. So, boy, I'll tell you, the first thing that comes to mind is going through the process of infidelity and working through that process is all about perspective. And we have a very good sense today around perspective for what's an emergency, what's a crisis in life. And it reminds me of that scene, the 80s movie Crocodile Dundee, where he's walking down the street and the mugger pulls out a knife and he says, "Give me your wallet." And he's like, "Well, hey, he's got a knife." He's like, "That's not a knife." He pulls out that giant knife, right? Well, crisis, things that we thought were crises before, they're not, right? Because we have faced what I consider to be the hardest thing. They say that the pain of infidelity is only one notch below, like the pain of losing a child. I hope that that never happens. But I suppose that I don't like to say I'm healed, she's healed, we're healed, but we're making a ton of progress. I can't own that verb tense that is putting it in the past.
Right.
But one of the things I think about though is like you hear people say, like, I remember when Rick Reynolds of Fair Recovery said, like, look, hey, some of the best marriages that he sees throughout his life and his practice are those who have been through this. And I hate, and I will always hate to my core what I did to our marriage. But I can also say that the marriage we have today, because I invested, she invested, she with a ton of grace, a ton of courage, and we invested in the marriage beyond both of ourselves. We built something that would never have existed. This terrible thing not happened. Again, I mentioned in a previous conversation with you that I'll put our marriage up against anybody's. And that's wild because I don't know that I fully believed it was possible that you could rebuild and have something. And then, as far as how I see myself in a previous conversation with you, I remember saying, "You're going to like the way you look," right? That old Men's Warehouse thing. I will
Right.
tell you that I am 4 years, into an honest recovery, just about. And I really do like the guy I see today. And while that will always be part of my past, I will always have that scar on my heart, as will my wife. I am determined I am not going to wear the scarlet letter the rest of my life. I will always respect and honor, and that sounds positive, but what I mean by that is I will always own what I did and be accountable for that 100%. But I'm not going to let that period of my life define the next 20 or 30 years, because to do so would not be fair to both myself, but to my wife and everybody I come in contact with. So it'll always be part of me, but it will not define me. And I know that sounds cliche, but damn it, I'm not going to let it. But we just have to remember the things that we're capable of. And if we just stay on a good road, maintain some discipline, give back a little bit, there's some wildly cool things that can happen in your life if you just put the work in. And my wife and I's marriage is a living example of that.
That was such a beautiful minute or two of just sharing what it's like to be where you're at, somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 years post D-Day and really doing the work. I mean, there's people that come to me who are 14 years down the road and they are nowhere near where you and your wife are. There's people who, man, they're desperate to believe that what you just said and are living is possible. Those of you that are watching and listening, if you're not in that position, please don't feel any shame. Please don't feel any condemnation. Please don't feel like you're the outcast. You can only control your side of the infidelity. You cannot control your partner's side. Sometimes we think if I just do enough healing, that somehow by osmosis it will translate into my partner doing their work as well. And that is just not true. So, my final thought for you, Ryan, I didn't even think about this, but in light of this little tangent that I just went on, isn't it true that your wife, I know the answer to this, but I'm teeing it up for you, but Isn't it true that your wife had to do a metric ton of work to even be willing to give you another chance, right?
See, 100%. That lift was far, far heavier for her. You have things like I trickled truth to her to death. She was very suspicious, right? Before everything came out, right? Deathbed confession. So this was not a surprise. And my heart hurts for all betrayeds, but those who get it out of the blue versus kind of are suspicious and then they kind of, it all kind of comes out. That work that has to be done by the betrayed cannot be underscored. Both types of work are different for each. She absolutely had to do a ton. I've heard stories of like, hey, you got to have a clear picture, right? You have to, create an environment of safety. Then you have to demonstrate, day by day, week by week, month by month, season by season that you're doing the work just to even for her to even be remotely open to the idea of considering a long-term relationship with me took all of those things. So getting to rock bottom, that took a ton of work, a ton of pain on her part, right? Then absorbing and understanding and digesting that over months and season, again, a ton of work, a ton of pain, and then learning this new reality. Like the guy I was married to wasn't the guy I thought he was. Yeah, what's kind of cool, like on the backside, and I heard somebody say this the other day, was they were talking about their spouse, decades after D-Day and working through recovery. They said, I didn't like husband 1.0, but I really like husband 2.0. Now, on my side, my wife would probably say, I didn't like husband 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and even 4.0, but I'm pretty damn sure she likes husband 5.0. And did she, right? Did she give me more chances than I deserved? Absolutely, yes, without any question. And is she the strongest person I know in the world? Without any question. And I am a very lucky guy, but she definitely put in the work, probably more than I did.
She not only put in the work, but she had to really confront a moral dilemma, which was, do I give this guy another chance after he's broken me and my heart, not once, but twice? And what a beautiful testimony to the fact that for those that are open, you can heal from infidelity. And for those that are open and have a spouse who's been unfaithful, who are willing to go all in and do the work, healing is absolutely possible. As we say goodbye today, I'm incredibly grateful for stopping by and listening to Ryan and myself today. I hope that today's podcast would give you hope for your situation, but also hope for you. I mean, I say it all the time. I've been saying it for 20 years. Ryan's a fresh voice from someone who's four some odd years out, that I know that you can feel the palpable sense of healing in his voice. He doesn't communicate out of shame or condemnation. He's not saying things to just kind of play to the masses. He is talking about his authentic story that I've had the pleasure of watching for years and being able to support him. And for wherever you're at, whatever you're dealing with, you can only control you, but you do have a lot of power over you. You may not have power over your partner. You might have influence, you might not right now, but you sure as heck have a whole lot of power over yourself and your own healing. And even if the only thing that you can do is work on you, then do that. If you're only going to work on you if your partner is going to give you a chance, well, I assure you, many betrayed partners oftentimes will say no, 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 but they're actually waiting to see what will the unfaithful do. Because if they're just doing it to please their spouse, they're not really doing it. If they're doing it because they know they need the work, that's a game changer. If I can help you in your work, reach out to me at samshealingpodcast@gmail.com or leave a comment here. If you want to reach out and leave a question for Ryan on any of the platforms that you're listening on, he'll do his best if he can to respond, or I will send it to him. But listen, at the end of the day, you've got to get help for you. If it's not me, get help from someone who's an expert, who's been through it, that can support you in your recovery. Because we can all learn a lot of things from Ryan, who hit rock bottom and decided to do the work to heal. Ryan, as always, thank you so much for coming in again. I hope you'll continue to come in regularly.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay, everybody, we'll see you next time on the podcast.